So they were going to allow WHO access to private Facebook data about its users' activities, and the government access to data about its users' activities, CDC. First up, obviously, is COVID-19. There are new mask requirements being put in place, new concerns about the Delta variant, new efforts to mandate vaccines. And I'm not going to get into the craziness around that, other than to say the CDC is corrupt. The CDC is corrupt. It's no different than the FBI. It's no different than the Justice Department or the NSA or other big government agencies we're used to talking about. It's as deep state as the rest of them. And you see the insanity and the whipsaw way in which they're approaching this COVID issue. I don't need to tell you much more than that. But I do want to talk about the pressing concern about the attack on our First Amendment rights because of big tech censorship, of criticism of the CDC, of criticism of their political health pronouncements, either by the FDA, the CDC, or WHO, which is in many ways a tool of the communist Chinese. And as you know, or should know, that Facebook and Twitter and all the rest have been censoring and suppressing posts that question some of the issues related to COVID. I know I've been blocked out of Twitter since January for highlighting a simple fact, a true fact about hydroxychloroquine, completely accurate, something that Twitter specifically had found not to be in violation of their rules, but now has decided is in violation of the rules, and they want me to take down that tweet supposedly, which is true and accurate, before I go back on. And forgive me for thinking I shouldn't have to do that. I've been locked out since January. Facebook has suppressed Judicial Watch information, censored Judicial Watch information related to government documents that we accurately reported on concerning adverse event reports detailed in Veteran Administration documents tied to the COVID-19 vaccines. So who knows, given what Facebook and Twitter and Google and YouTube, Google owns YouTube, so whenever you hear YouTube, think Google. Facebook owns Instagram too, so whenever you think Instagram, think Facebook. So the rules are arbitrarily enforced, they're capricious, they changed based on politics, not based on, quote, science. So these are dangerous times for our civil liberties and the First Amendment. And the concern is that these private entities really are acting as if they're government entities, not just effectively, but literally, in the sense that they're coordinating with the government to suppress information they don't like. And you may recall the Biden administration full-heartedly or fully endorsed that censorship and is now pushing for specific censorship by Facebook of what they consider to be misinformation or disinformation. And if you're the Biden administration, criticism of the Biden administration is almost necessarily misinformation. So we're not allowed to criticize anything related to COVID unless it's blessed. And so questions about the vaccine's efficacy and safety are essentially banned. Both ill-founded ones and well-founded ones. And let me just say this, those folks who pretend to know the difference don't know jack. And they're lying to you if they pretend to know the difference. And this is why more information rather than less information is better. And I trust you to separate the wheat from the chaff, to separate the information that is obviously false or is probably false, or you should just look at and just put in the back of your mind because it may or may not be true, but it's not going to impact your decision making. So Judicial Watch has long been interested because we suspected that the bungling nature and illogical and political nature of the censorship of citizens on Facebook, Twitter, and Google is so egregious that it just can't be a private sector initiative. It's so bad, the government has to be involved, right? And certainly on election issues, which is tied to COVID, because the election changes were largely in response as election law changes or procedures were often in response to COVID mania. We showed that in California and in Iowa, you had intervention by government officials to delete material, accurate material, specifically targeting Judicial Watch, other citizens too. Coordination and collusion to censor material from the internet through Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, you name it. So we were very interested to know about the similar efforts at the federal level with COVID. So we did an initial request. Of course, we were stonewalled because that's what they do on COVID issues. You have legitimate questions as a citizen they don't want to answer in a timely way. We've had to sue for everything, and including this request, which was tied to, let me bring it up on my phone here, any and all records of communications between CDC officials and or employees, and employees, agents, and or representatives of Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube concerning, regarding, or relating to COVID-19 related content or in company platforms. Such records include, but are not limited to, any advice or instructions issued on disinformation related COVID-19. And so we received 2,469 documents or pages of documents after we sued. We had to sue again. When did we sue for this stuff? We sued in March. Oh, well, this is a world record response. Of course, we asked for these documents in September, so it only took about a year, right? A little less than a year to get them. And as I said, when we asked the question or sued in court, the public has a right to know about CDC's involvement in big tech's outrageous censorship of Americans, including doctors who raise questions about the COVID-19 response. And I called on the Biden administration to stop the stonewalling and release the documents, but we did get some documents. It's only, of course, after we filed a federal lawsuit for it. So again, this is probably a good time frame. If you're ever wondering how long it takes, it usually takes about a year of non-response and a federal lawsuit before you get documents. That's typically how long it takes. That's the lawlessness. By the way, FOIA requires responses within 20 days. So if you want a full response, you got to sue, and it takes a year. So there's this endemic. If you talk about a pandemic, there's a pandemic of secrecy, illicit secrecy in the federal government. So these new documents, I'm sorry to take so long to get to the big news, show collusion, as our headline says. CDC coordinated with Facebook on COVID-19 messaging and, quote, misinformation. And CDC received over $3.5 million in free advertising from the social media companies. So I encourage you to go and look at these documents directly, and you're going to be interested to read them, I think. They show that Facebook sent to the CDC a document called Facebook Coronavirus Narrative to the CDC. So they send their narrative to the CDC. And it states the following in part: Facebook is taking a three-pronged approach to the global response for the coronavirus. And I think this is the most interesting part of that. Limit misinformation and other harmful content on our platforms. Our third-party fact checkers have been rating information on this topic as false, including the AP, PolitiFact, AFP, Hong Kong, Rappel.io in the Philippines. As a result, we show people who come across that false content accurate information from our fact-checking partners and strong warning labels. So censorship and suppression. We also send notifications to people who've already shared this content, alerting them that it's been fact-checked. So what they do is they use leftist fact checkers to target people putting out information about COVID. And the fact checkers are leftists, and their goal is to suppress information that is harmful to the big government narrative on COVID. That's what I think they do. That's been my experience with it. And this is sent, by the way, on January 26, 2020. So COVID isn't even out the door, practically speaking, here in the United States. And Facebook already is coordinating with CDC, telling them, don't worry, we're going to delete material and censor it. Hand in glove. And they're going to provide accurate and helpful information on our platforms to our partners. And the partners include they gave ad credits to WHO. So Facebook gave money to WHO, the China Front operation, who bent over backwards to protect the Chinese in the beginning of coronavirus. And they're talking about additional steps they can take, including dedicated information modules on relevant search queries and improved search ranking, which is another way for saying they're going to suppress certain content and elevate other content. And they're going to empower partners with data tools. And they were going to, and the partners included, and they were exploring doing this with a broader set of partners beyond the academy as WHO. So they were going to allow WHO access to private Facebook data about its users' activities, and the government access to data about its users' activities, CDC, to help partners understand how people are talking about the issue online through tools like CrowdTangle to inform their efforts. And CrowdTangle is the analysis tool, one of the analysis tools they use. So if this doesn't count as message coordination, I don't know what does. And the CDC, as I say, was given over $3.5 million of free advertising on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And the documents show that pretty clearly. And you know what I think is interesting about these documents? I'll tell you, because when I was looking at them, there's thousands of pages of documents, you're trying to review them. And I was getting confused as to where the documents were coming from, in that I had to keep on going back to the email sender and recipient fields, because I was confused as to whether Facebook was sending the document or whether it was a government document. That's how hand in glove, that's how joined at the hip they were. That was hard, if you didn't have the sender and recipient fields, you would be hard pressed to figure out who was writing the emails. And so you've got the government getting $3.5 million to boost posts. And then you have this admitted effort by Facebook early on to censor people. Now, we all know that censorship in part included censoring information about the origins of the Wuhan virus, meaning whether it came from a lab or had it originated in a lab versus, somewhere in nature. And they were censoring. Was that part of this? I think that's how else could you? They basically admitted that they would stop censoring. So it was part of it. So they weren't censoring people, only saying, "Oh, you should drink some dangerous liquid or do something obviously dangerous." No, they were censoring political commentary. And whenever you hear scientific consensus as an excuse to censor people, it's the complete opposite of science. It's the complete opposite of science. And of course, it's really not about science. This is about politics. So these documents show that Facebook and CDC are joined at the hip on managing the ever-changing COVID-19 narrative. And as I said earlier, it's ever-changing. And when you don't have to point to evidence in order to change your mandates, or you're not required to, or there's really no standard of evidence that you have to use in terms of saying, well, what's the basis of this? And then when you point to the basis, it could be whatever you want it to be. From I'm worried, which to me would be much more honest. I just wish these government officials would just say, you know what? We don't know, and we're worried. So we're being maybe overly cautious, but we think it's warranted because we're very worried and this virus is nasty if you get it. That would have been, I think, acceptable to large swaths of the population. But instead it's, you do what I say, and if you question it, you're a racist and a Republican, and you should suffer awful consequences and be denied the ability to work, be denied the ability to school, all sorts of punishment. That's big government at work. So they got this collusion to manage the narrative, and it involves censorship, and it involves, it's clear, the government. The Biden administration has lifted the veil. I don't need a FOIA document to point to prove the case, because I can point to what the president's spokesman says, what President Biden says, public documents. Of course, for the media, sometimes that isn't even enough. So we've got a lot of questions here. These documents are consistent with the concern that big government and big tech are joined hand in glove, joined at the hip. No daylight in censorship and propagandizing related to COVID. So we'll see what's going to happen. My view is the left is they're planning for more shutdowns and more lockdowns, more suppression, more censorship, more mandates. And I keep on looking for the Fauci gold standard studies, the randomized placebo-controlled studies that their medical interventions to control the spread of coronavirus actually do control the spread of coronavirus. That's the question I have. Meaning lockdowns and mask mandates and social distancing. Where's the science behind that? Other than they think it's a good idea because that's what their instincts are. Which I said, that's more honest than saying, how dare you question this? So forgive me for saying those things. That may get me censored. Who knows? Maybe you won't be able to see this. If you are able to see this, it's another victory for the First Amendment, at least for today. So we are not afraid of the censorship. We're going to keep on asking these questions. We sue in federal court, and we take this stuff seriously. We take accountability seriously. So more is coming.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.